Hello. Okay, we're live tonight. We promoted this little live with one of my really good friends, Hugh, who's going to talk about Mustang Medicine, some healing practices on retreats that people can go to, mine, his, what's out there for us as far as learning from the nervous system. Hi, Nicole. Learning about the nervous system. We're definitely going to talk about a lot of emotions and trauma, how to heal those kinds of wounds and what that means. So hop on with your questions. And as you listen, I'm going to be kind of watching this. So if you have questions for Hugh, which I know a lot of us were excited to hear from him tonight, we will get to ask him our questions. Hi, guys. You guys are so awesome. It is such an amazing day to do this. How was everyone's Sunday? Okay, so all help us with in our retreat this September, actually, as one of our main facilitators.
Good.
Hi.
How are you?
Hello, how are you?
You're sideways.
Good.
There you
Am
go.
I sideways or am I straight up to you? There we go. I was sideways to myself too. Cool. I'm going to put a little better sound in here. Wow, how's your Sunday going? Amazing. So I was just telling them all the things that you do and about Mustang Medicine and why I was so excited to see you tonight, and telling them that what's really cool is we've been friends for a little bit and I've been on some of Hugh's events, and so has my husband, so has some of my friends. And I was so excited because me and Megs run these retreats for women and have one in September. And what Hugh does just fits the model of what we're teaching and what we're sharing so well that he's agreed to come be one of the facilitators next September and teach us a little bit about the nervous system and Mustang medicine, and we'll get to witness a Mustang lay down. So I'll link stuff in the comments and the replay of this later so you can contact me and see my events and
So
his events.
your event's
but
coming up
thank you for
September
joining
15th.
me.
And the theme that you guys have, I know, has to do with kind of Mother Earth. That's always the hardest thing to figure out, like a theme for. When I do my events, I just call them rewilding, and like we have a definition for rewilding, which is kind of to peel the layers back into our wholeness. But it's not really a thing, you know. Like you hear about rewilding, and it's like, hey, what is that? And everyone's always trying to define, you know, these retreats, and I'm like, I don't know, just come.
I know. I feel like that's so relatable. But I was curious about yours too because they always have the same title, and I was wondering if you feel like the same themes come up every time, or if that just allows you the freedom, you know, to kind of riff off of who shows up and what people need. The difficult thing with naming ours is that we name them and promote them and let people sign up, but as time goes on, you know, depending on what people are going through or the collective conscious or even astrology, the theme kind of evolves to be what it needs to be at that time, which I couldn't name
we're very
a year ago.
structured in terms of we have a full layout. We know exactly when people are checking in. We know what the next event is, the next facilitator, and it's really jam-packed from Thursday night to Sunday. And it's always the same thing, but it's always different. And I think that's just because of the people that show up and how they show up and the homework that they've done in preparation of it. But we're very organized in our structure and what our day looks like. But there's definitely that balance of trying to figure out the structured flow, right? It's like I want flow, but I also want structure. It's kind of blending the masculine and the feminine, if you will.
Yeah, I love that, actually. I loved that on the first retreat I came to of yours too, where you were like, this is what we do, but we also feel out the day, you know, and kind of flow. And I remember, you know, being in a place where I was pretty scared last year to come and was kind of dealing with some new things. And there was that part of it that felt like it was challenging me a little bit, you know, to be able to back into that flow and divine feminine, which I wanted so badly. But, you know, every time you try to do it, it's a little challenging. But then the structure, you know, made me feel a little safer. Like, well, at least I know I will be doing, you know, sometimes.
You know, we do those rewildings, but that's where we just do the lay down for the horses. But the one that you came to, you know, we keep them much smaller. We do similar things. We don't have as many ceremonies. We don't have as many experiences, but we spend more time with the horses, more time riding. So the rewilding events that we do, no one rides a horse. You don't even like play with horses. But in those ones, we've got 20, 30, I think our biggest one, we did like 35 people in that. So the idea of having like 30 horses sounds horrendous to me. So, yeah. How to organize that?
Like a true cowboy.
That would be horrible.
But in that big rewilding too, which I have some friends who have attended that with you and have absolutely loved that. They do it the Mustang laydown, and that's what you're going to do for us in September, right? That's part of all offerings. Yeah, so I know that I have a lot of people who have been kind of excited about that and are wondering about that too. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about, I don't know how much you want to tell us about you, and kind of how you got here, if you want to give a little details or kind of an overview and what led you to the horses, and then also a little bit about why this medicine is so powerful and maybe a little bit what they would experience
a little bit
when
about
they come.
Me. I guess I'll go backwards and then work to today. I've always had a knack for marketing and messaging.
Okay.
I feel like I just understand how to put really complex and very challenging messages together in a tasteful way that will resonate more at the soul level instead of an IQ level. And I worked on a project. Actually, I helped start a project. And the main idea of the project was the way I would summarize it would be to change the hearts and the minds of the people, because there's so much pain and like hurt people, right? And it's like, how do you change the hearts and the minds of the people? And the answer that came, we got an opportunity in that organization to sit down with some really influential people, and I was able to get a really interesting answer with one of these big influencers, and I'll let his name remain anonymous, but he said you would change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts. And I just got really passionate about that. And that's where Mustang Medicine actually came. So I always had horses, and I always loved horses, and I was always attending clinics. And for me, horses have been my best therapist. And I went down to this guy who is he's a wild Mustang trainer, and I watched him gentling these horses, like these Mustangs. And as he was gentling them, one of his process was to lay the horse down. And that's a very vulnerable situation for a horse. You have to understand, try to put that into context. A horse is a prey animal, and humans are predators, and horses know this because horses have eyes on the side of their face so that they can scan their entire horizon. That gives them their advantage. But then humans, we've got eyes in the front of our face, And so that gives us that predatory advantage where we can like attack, right? So all predators have eyes in the front of their face. So if you're a wild horse and everything in the wild is out to hurt you, harm you, and kill you, and you're a prey animal, so you're just constantly dysregulated. Your nervous system believes that everything is going to hurt you, harm you, or kill you. So when you bring a wild horse into captivity and into domestic life, what you end up getting is like you end up getting a very dysregulated nervous system. So you have this horse that's constantly in fight or flight. If you haven't, you know, like for those who are listening that have any understanding of the nervous system. And so what a horse really wants to know is it wants to know, like, where is my safety at? So I got to watch these demonstrations, and then I ended up learning it and applying it to my horses. And I had some horses that had a lot of anxiety and had a lot of nervousness, and was able to help develop their confidence by teaching them how to be confident through vulnerability, which is really like Brene Brown, right? All of her teaching is all about the power of vulnerability. And so, I don't know, I just ended up taking all of my research and being able to create a demonstration of the power of vulnerability and like understanding the nervous system. And so for humans, I think this is very interesting, and it's very well documented. I take courses from a couple different organizations. One is the National Institute for Clinical Behavior. And what it is it's all these accredited courses to be able to help therapists, life coaches, psychologists from the leading experts on trauma. So they have really, really good trauma, like information courses. And for humans, trauma is a very interesting thing. Trauma is not actually what happened to us. Trauma is what was left inside of us after what happened. And what was left inside of us is the story that we tell. So we have this prefrontal cortex that, you know, if anyone like understands trauma, you got to understand the prefrontal cortex, which is, if you take your fingers and you put them just behind you touch your eyebrows, just behind your eyebrows is where your prefrontal cortex is located. And the human brain has the exact same brain that the horse brain has, except for we have this added part, which is the prefrontal cortex. And that makes up about 50% the size of our brain. So this is all of our reasoning skills. This is all of our imagination. And this is our narration. In other words, our storytelling skills. And a lot of us don't have the awareness of how often we tell stories. This is why, this is how we really learn and we really understand things, is through storytelling. And that's because our brain can retain all the information. And that all happens through the story is in our prefrontal cortex. That being said, horses can go through really, really painful experiences, and they don't carry trauma with them, like emotional trauma, as much as humans do, because there's not this repeating story that's happening, if that makes sense. So like if I tie a horse to a hitching post compared to if you tied me to a hitching post, I would, as soon as you let me back out to go hang out with my friends, I'd be like, that freaking Crystal girl tied my face to this post, and I had to stand there, for 45 minutes while she put a saddle on me. And right. And then I would just go bitch about that to all my friends. And then the horses don't do that. They live in the moment. They live in the now. And so there's no story that happens. So for me, when I've been betrayed or when I've been abandoned and I have these really painful experiences, I go home and I tell my friends and my family about it. And 3 years later down the road, I'm still talking about it at Thanksgiving. And every time I'm re-talking about that story, I'm revisiting what was left inside after that event, right? so so that's where trauma, according to the experts, that's where emotional trauma is really coming from, is I'm retelling the story, re-experiencing the emotions, and basically reliving it. That's what makes PTSD the disorder, is that I can't get back in order. I can't get back in structure to my life. I'm disorderly because I can't get out of the story because of what I made it mean. If that, like, I think that's a decent way of describing it.
I think that's a really good explanation. I love that because I have extensive experience with PTSD, and they use a slightly different definition of the past is present. And so when you are talking about retelling that story consciously, you're making anatomical effectuations in your body when you're retelling it. And so, like you said, you're experiencing it over and over and over again, not just in your mind, but in your hormonal system, in your nervous system, and the way your body's shaped and the way you respond. And it's so advanced, like it's so set into your ways. Like you said, it's hard to imagine another way. It's hard to imagine living like a horse without a prefrontal cortex and having something terrible happen to you and speak about it like Eckhart Tolle tells us to speak about it, which is not like Hugh hit my car. You're even supposed to say something like, my car got hit, and try to not tell those stories right from the beginning, which is really difficult because, of the principles that you teach. And I like the definition of trauma, as you put it in your curriculum, even better, because then it helps us understand, and hopefully you'll just give that to us right now, but then it helps us understand why is it that the letting go is so hard and that the stories are perpetuated. Why is it that we need to grab onto that and then continue to say, that person tied me the hitching post, and now I've got to remember that and look out for that and continue to tell that story. Why?
And I love Eckhart, and you can't, as a human, you cannot not tell a story. Another way to say that is you're going to tell a story. But there's two ways to tell the story, and it's either the victim story or the co-creator story. And this took me a long time, and I didn't really even get good at this till like maybe 2 years ago, maybe 18 months ago, when I realized it was how I was telling the story, right? Am I a victim to it? See, and I have charts. If anyone wants this, they can send me a DM, and I'll just send. I do one-on-one coaching to help people walk through this. I'll send you all of my charts on this. I designed a really fantastic, brilliant chart to try to explain this. But if you imagine a triangle, like you have two triangles that are opposing each other, right? So you got a triangle that faces like this, and then you got one that's upside down. Exactly. So that's because we live in the world of duality, right? And this is the world of duality, is the fruit that Adam and Eve ate. I think it's this beautiful metaphorical story that they are exposed to good and evil. There's not really a good Hebrew word for evil. That's not the best translation. It'd basically be like good and not good, right? It'd be like eating the fruit of light and dark, or anything that's opposing. That's what the metaphor is like trying to teach us. And so, that being said, I looked at, well, how could I take these concepts and just look at what is the opposite of it? Because sometimes it's easier to understand what something is by knowing what it is not, and then I can reverse engineer what it actually is, because I don't have a lot of experience with what it is. I have more experience with what it is not. So that being said, with trauma, it's like, well, or not even trauma, but like the victim story. So if I'm a victim, what's the opposite of being a victim? Would be being a co-creator, right? Meaning like there's multiple parties involved, and we're all in creation of this. If I'm not in creation of it, well, now I'm a victim to it, right? And so I have to start. And if I'm a victim to it, well, gosh, then I need something really, really critical. If I'm a victim, I need a rescuer or I need a savior. And now I've got to have something that I need saving from, right? So all victims have two people involved in their life, and that's a villain and a savior. But now if you just like reverse the logic on all of that stuff, you say, well, what's the opposite of what's the opposite of a villain, right? And it'd be more like an advocate, right? So someone, he's not trying to get me, he's actually trying to put things into context for me. He's trying to help me out. And it doesn't mean that I didn't crash into the car, or I didn't have my mistake, or I didn't have my screw up. I totally do. That's the human experience. But that doesn't mean that I'm a victim to it, and it doesn't mean that I did it on purpose, and it doesn't have to mean all of these things, right? And so then if I have this, like, instead of having a rescuer, what if it, and again, this is my logic, and I designed this whole little chart, and the chart makes sense probably better than I'm explaining it, but for me, the opposite of a rescuer would be an empathetic witness, right? Somebody who can witness me in my pain with empathy. And so I call it the empathetic witness, which Peter Levine, who's one of the leading trauma experts out there, says that trauma can actually be healed. This is emotional trauma. All of our emotional trauma can actually be healed as long as it is as long as we can sit in our story with an empathetic witness, because somebody can say, I understand what that would be like. The value of that is then I feel seen and I feel heard, and then I don't have to retell the story. The reason I'm retelling the story is because when it all happened, I felt abandoned, I felt abused. It could be different things that you might feel, but I might feel abandoned, I might feel abused or misused, I might feel betrayed, I might feel rejected. So all of those, it doesn't matter which one it is, I do not feel seen, I do not feel heard, I do not feel known. And again, I'm talking about emotional, like I don't feel emotionally seen, I don't feel emotionally heard. So I feel abandoned, abused, and betrayed and rejected. So that's why I keep telling the story, because gosh, if I got abandoned or I got abused or I got betrayed and now I'm a victim to this whole thing, well, what does that mean about me, right? See, that's the story that I'm actually telling. And if I make it mean, that I'm not good enough, right, or that there's some problem with it, or problem with me, and I don't want to believe that, something in my soul tells me that's not true, well, now I got to tell a story that makes you the villain, or I got to make somebody the villain, and I got to be like, no, they're the, they're the bastard that did this. They're the one that's not enough. And so this is all causing trauma, because what happens is that it separates us and it divides us, and then we don't feel seen and we don't feel heard. And then that other person didn't, maybe they were just behaving out of their own wounds and their emotional wounds, and I'm trying not to swear. I swear a ton. I wear cowboy boots, and so I'm like trying to catch myself. I flow so much better when I get a swear. And I promise, when you come out and you see the retreats and you listen to my presentation, so many swear words just beautifully flow out.
They're right there in the triangle.
I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I'll hurt people's feelings when they pay me, and they pay you, and then we got them trapped here at the ranch. Yeah.
And they're invested, and there's no way.
Becky says, "Go ahead, swear." Okay, I'm going for it. Okay. I'll talk about Adam and Eve, and I'll talk about the ancient stories, and I'll talk about the fuckery of Orthodox religion and all that stuff, and then I'll bring it all together, because I think it's still all unified and it's still one.
Well, it makes so much sense, because I just wanted to double click on your chart is so beautiful. So you've got to reach out to Hugh if that was kind of like a fire hose too, and you want to piece those things apart, because the chart is so brilliantly done. I think I called it a map when I saw it. But some of those, like if you looked at any one of those things you kind of overart, you can start picking out all of the black and white, the polarization, a lot of these symptoms that cause so much suffering is derived from the root of what you just explained. And I think it's so beautiful because I first heard that concept by Brenda Brown when she first came out and was talking about the petri dish of shame.
Yeah.
And if you just put some empathy in there, then the shame no longer grows. Petri dish, you know, and as a biologist and anatomy teacher, that just makes so much sense to me. So I just feel like at the root of the trauma and the retelling of the stories and the emotions, I had learned to do that for myself at first. And I think that's the most powerful practice because a lot of us don't have people around who are learned in this or can respond in an appropriate way. A lot of us didn't have parents who taught us that or partners, and now we're trying to do it for our children. And so I think one of the most powerful practices, and I know you and I have talked about this in extent, is that when you're with someone or teaching someone or witnessing for them, it's important to continue to point them back to themselves, because all is not lost if you can't make it on a retreat this year, or you don't have a friend like Hugh that you can call whenever, you know. And so there was this powerful practice I learned from Brene Brown, which was just a very simple pause, recognition of the shame, and having empathy and compassion for myself and some understanding, which dilutes so much of it. It dilutes enough to be able to reach out, right? Or to be able to start shifting a perspective a little bit, and to start seeing that the victim mentality was showing up, at least for me in my life. And, you know, we're always working on it. We're always evolving. But I know I had a stark realization also 4 or 5 years ago when there were places it was hiding from me, and I thought I had evolved the victim mentality, and there's like these little blind spots and these little places it's insidious, and the symptoms are what you said, and someone said in the comments, which I liked Tyler's description too, was what did he say, the victim triangle is real or something, or the triangle, right, with the villain. So if you find yourself blaming, which is something that's in your map, right, shame and blame, then something's kind of gone awry, right? Something's not been witnessed. And I have some signs and symptoms and triggers for myself that I've learned about myself. If somebody's to blame, right, or something's happened to me, or I don't know what the next step is, then I can immediately read those triggers where some, you know, work needs to be done, or where I can revisit those things. So I appreciate you speaking to that too. And that's also where I started learning about the sovereignty aspect that you teach about a lot too, which I was like, it can all kind of be encompassed here. Like we're so powerful. And I think it was Mother Theresa quote that said, our biggest fear isn't that we are incapable, right? And that we are the victim and all this is happening to us. Our biggest fear is that we're powerful. We're powerful beyond belief. And that's what your map kind of shifts, right? Where you're picking all these places of blame, you know, and victimhood mentality. And you're saying, not only is that not true, but when you can step into the things you've been afraid of, you've been afraid to take the responsibility, you've been afraid to tell a story like this, but what's on the other side of that is so much power, right? And are we afraid of that? Are we afraid of what that might mean, or the responsibility,
you were saying earlier about the self and being able to we have to take things back to the self. The reason that we have to take things back to the self, and again, if we look at duality, or like what's the opposite, because there's opposition in everything. So I ask a lot of people in my coaching, I say, well, what's the opposite of self? And the common answer is others. And yeah, technically that I guess could be a thing, but the opposite of self is the fragmented self. In other words, what we don't understand when we think about the self is that the self is whole. So when a child is born, it's whole. There's nothing wrong with the child, right? And so then it's like, well, what happens to the child that starts to fragment it? But that's the definition of emotional trauma. Again, this is going back to like Gabor Mate. I hope everyone is saying or reading Gabor's work. It's freaking brilliant. And Gabor talks about how trauma is the fragment. It fragments the psyche. The psyche is my belief about who I am, right? How do I know who I am if I think that I'm broken or I think that I'm fragmented? And so what I'm saying is that the opposite of the whole self is the fragmented self, and the fragmented self is my trauma, because it's the parts where I felt abandoned, I felt abused, misused, betrayed, rejected, and the story that I told about that. What did I make that mean about me when I went through that? Fragments me. So if I have like an issue where I'm a, maybe I've got some mommy issues like I do, right? But maybe some of the listeners got some challenges about yourself. Where you got yourself, your belief about yourself, your fragmented self, came from the people that gave you the care. It's your caregivers, right? And all they did was they just passed on their beliefs of their fragmented self. And so this is how trauma passes on generational. And so the fragmented self, what I need to look at is what is the opposite of trauma. If trauma is the fragmenting of the self or the fragmenting of the psyche, then the opposite of that would be my wholeness. And wholeness is fantastic because this is what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. It's in chapter 5, if you remember, like Jesus' Sermon on the Mount starts in Matthew chapter 5, goes through chapter 6, and then ends in chapter 7. So it's 3 chapters in Matthew. And in chapter 5, towards the beginning, he's trying to tell them, he starts out with the blesseds, right? Blessed are this people and blessed are these people. But then he says, you're not going to actually understand this, and you can't understand these things unless you understand that you are whole. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. And what he says, and I'm going to give you the Greek translation because I don't think the English makes too much sense today, because the English that we have today came from the English of the 1600s, and we just don't speak that way anymore. But if we translated it from the original Greek, what Jesus was saying is, own your wholeness, realizing that you are complete, lacking no parts as you are. Well, gosh, I've been abandoned, and I've been abused, and I've been betrayed, and I've been I've been rejected, and I made that mean something about me, that I'm not good enough, right? That there's problems with me, and we have evidence to prove that I really screwed up. And so what he's saying is, yeah, but those truths those facts don't explain the truth that you're still whole as you are. So the good news is that we can actually return to our wholeness. So the opposite of trauma is wholeness. Nobody ever talks about what the opposite of trauma is. If you just think about that and you said, well, somebody asked you the question, what's the opposite of light? You would say dark, right? What's the opposite of good? You would say bad. You say, well, what's the opposite of trauma? And what most people say is healing. But that's actually the process to getting back to wholeness. So the opposite of trauma is wholeness, because trauma is fragmented, right? Trauma is the fragmentation of the psyche. Healing, the ancient Greek word for healing, is the restoration to wholeness, right? That's where I got the understanding. I just looked up the ancient definition of wholeness, and this is even in English in this 13th century, that the word healing means a restoration to wholeness. Well, it's like, oh, well, then that means that wholeness is the opposite. And what's the message that Jesus is teaching? Own your wholeness. Realize that you're complete, lacking no parts. And it's like, well, I can't, because I have these beliefs.
Yeah. And I was reading Mary Magdalene's gospel this morning, because it just never gets old. And right at the beginning, the first part of the manuscript that isn't lost, when they ask Jesus, what is sin? And he basically echoes that same thing. There is no sin. Sin is something you've done or something you've participated in. But, like adultery, he says in that manuscript, right. But it doesn't subscribe to who you are. It's not you. You're not that. It's something you did. It's like all the things we learn in the parenting classes that are like, you're good inside to the kid. It's, you're not the bad thing. You may have participated in X, Y, or Z, but that does not infer anything about your wholeness or your worth. I wanted to add a thought, because this year I read for the second time, and the first time really paying attention, The Sum of Your Parts, which is by a psychologist who first experimented with PTSD and returning war veterans in the 80s, and kind of evolved his practice over the next 30 years with that research. And started out, you read that one, started out not knowing very much, and kind of evolved it into similar principles, which is like, I think he ended up working even with bipolar disorder and a lot of more mental illnesses as well as PTSD. But he came to the same conclusion in every sense of the word of anyone who's experienced trauma has a fractured mind. It's been fractured, whether it's by understanding or literal, or a belief system, or a story they're retelling. It's that some part of them is not whole, or is not part of their whole, right? And so all the practices in there were extremely powerful for me to understand this principle as well when I started incorporating them, and inviting in the part or the experience or the child at 11 years old, or who I was at 18 years old and had experiences that had fractured that. And not only recognizing that they were fractured, but inviting them to have a seat at the table again, and witnessing that as all necessary, and also, once again, as not sin, as not duality, but
because the fracturing or the fragmentation so that was is well, it's the story that I tell, right? Like if I have a you got, let's say you got two horses out in the pasture, and I throw a big bale of hay out there. They go run over to the bale of hay. One of them, the more dominant horse, is going to kick the other horse, right? So now they're beating the hell out of each other. Well, the horse that gets kicked doesn't go tell a story about it. He moves, and then he kind of, checks himself, makes sure nothing is broken, and they come back, and then they figure things out. But there's no story afterwards. He doesn't go and tell his other pasture buddies, in the stall next to him. He's not like, did you see him kick me? It's probably because I'm a brown horse, right, with spots. Like, there's no story behind it. It just is what it is until they live in the moment. The challenge with the prefrontal cortex that we have as humans is that I can live in the past and I can live in the future, and those are competing with me living in the present, right? But horses don't have that competition in their mind. They just live in the present. So what happens is that they have an experience, they feel the emotion of that experience. It can be painful, right? They can have depression, they can have sadness, they can have anger, but it moves through them, and then there's no story, and they don't go back and visit it in the past. So it's like, I got a lot of clients that are always talking about their anxiety. And it's like, oh, well, the anxiety is about the future, and you're future tripping. You're tripping on the future that could potentially bring more pain because you're dwelling on the pain of the past, and your mind just doesn't want to go there, right? And it's like, well, of course I want to avoid pain in the future because the pain in the past was horrible. And it's like, that's all in competition with the present moment. And we have to start developing emotional intelligence to literally have intelligence about my emotions and what am I experiencing right now? What does it feel like? Where's it at in my body? Identify it, become aware of it, and then be able to receive the message of that emotion. I'll give you an example of this. I mean, this shit changed my life. It's like, if I feel anger, well, it's because somebody abandoned me, abused me, misused me, betrayed me, or rejected me. Those are the things that are going to piss me off more than anything. So of course if I feel that happened, then I'm going to get angry. It's like, well, what is anger trying to teach me? But my victim story is that anger is trying to teach me that you're an asshole and that I should stay away from assholes and that I shouldn't be around you. And then if you're an asshole, well, then how do I identify how to stay around you? Well, you're manipulative, you're narcissistic, and I'll start labeling you. This is another part of the Sermon on the Mount, was in chapter 7. It says, judge not. But you could replace the word judge to label. Label not, lest ye be labeled, is a fair modern day translation, right? But I got to try to name things, right? And so it's like this whole wrestle with the prefrontal cortex to be able to just get into the present moment. And the way that you wrestle with it is that you just embrace the emotions that are coming. So the actual truth is that I'm angry, and anger isn't a healthy, normal emotion that's trying to teach me that one of my boundaries has been crossed. Well, the reason that my boundary was crossed is because I wasn't firm in holding my boundary. And so now I can actually learn from this experience to be able to have healthy boundaries. This is the thing, is that I'm angry because I don't have healthy boundaries because the boundary was crossed. But if I'm a victim, I'm going to start blaming you and shaming you and all these things. And now I'm tortured by that experience, and there's so much emotional pain, but I won't embrace the emotional pain. So I don't embrace my anger as an example in this. So if I'm not embracing my anger, how do I ever learn where my boundaries were crossed? It's like I can't, because I'm tortured rather than taught by my anger, right? And I don't know if that's making sense, but it makes sense in my brain.
Yeah. Jeff's saying true. You can't label without first judging.
Jeff, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's making so much sense. Go back and clarify the main points, which it was like 3 things, right, on the path to wholeness. And one of the major things, which I would see as step 1, you said, was like this kind of labeling thing, but we could just call it emotional intelligence, right? It's an awareness practice, or it's something that gets you over the hump of realizing what's going on, right? Being able to label something and gaining some emotional intelligence. But then with the example of the horses, and I was smiling so big because I was waiting for the horse metaphors, was they move it through their bodies, right? So there's a lot of ideas and cognition surrounding what's appropriate and not appropriate, and what healing modalities are available to us, or teachings that have been lost, or just things like, I know you do cold plunges, right? Like there's a lot of these things, moving the motions through our body. And then another way, or another thing on this path to wholeness, is the witnessing aspect, right? That being unseen and unheard, which you can do arguably for yourself, or have somebody else do for you, right? But that's an important piece to go back. And so I feel like those 3 steps are kind of like the first things to start understanding, or finding some wins, or some, footing in this emotional intelligence and healing journey. Becky was asking, so if the opposite of trauma is wholeness, then do I not need to go out and discover all these new talents or pieces of my personality, or, participate in all these different facets of myself as part of this healing journey? And I want to hear your thoughts, but one thing I want to say that might seem a little, I don't know if this would be the answer you're expecting, but based on my experience, I mean, the easy answer is kind of absolutely. If you could just sit here and you could have an enlightenment, samadhi, epiphany experience right now, where you just realized, oh my gosh, I am whole. There's nothing I need to add unto me, right? I've witnessed myself. I see emotions as messengers. I understand the trauma. Everything's working for me, not against me, right? And you just flip the switch, and you were like, wholeness. I mean, we find these moments in meditation, and in epiphanies, intellectually, and in other practices, but that's not super easily accessible, at least for me, and definitely wasn't at the beginning of my journey to wholeness. There's no way, and so yes, I want to know what Becky has to say about that, and I want you to comment on this too, where I feel like the path to wholeness is going to incorporate a lot of different facets, because there are things that, like you said, like the horse metaphor again, you're going to have to find ways to regulate your nervous system, right? You're going to have to find things that make sense to your intelligence. You're going to have to get yourself in safe spaces. Maybe part of that is your creative expression. Maybe it is moving into parts of your personality you've lost, but all of that is leading you to that recognition and wholeness.
So,
absolutely.
Remind me of the question.
Yeah, what are your thoughts? So Becky's original question was, if wholeness is the opposite of trauma, then do we not need to participate in you know, this whole dog and pony show? I think she had said creative expression, finding the parts of myself that are lost, all of these different facets on that journey. Because, and I think what she's saying, and she can comment here again if I think she's still here. I think what she's saying is if I'm already whole, then what am I off in search of?
The truth is you're in search of nothing. However, and again, this is the world according to Hugh. If you are whole, but you've forgotten that you're whole, then maybe what you're in search of is your remembrance. And how do you get your remembrance? Instagram live videos with Crystal and Hugh. That's how you get your remembrance. No, I'm joking. How do you get your remembrance? Well, you get your remembrance by going through experiences, right? What kind of experiences are you going to go through? Well, again, in the world according to Hugh, you're going to go through two types of experiences. And all you have to do is understand what the opposites are. The first experience you're going to go through is abandonment, right? That's the human experience. Like, welcome aboard. Like, keep your hands and arms inside the ride at all times. Like wear your freaking seatbelt. But what am I judging? I'm judging my abandonment that's happened and the dynamics the details that caused that. Well, that's trauma, right? People who are in their wholeness don't pass on trauma because there's they're whole, they're complete. I'm not abandoning people because I don't abandon myself, right? And so it doesn't mean that people don't feel abandoned. Anyway, what one of the experiences I'm going to go through is abandonment. Well, what's the opposite of abandonment, right? It's belonging. So that's the other experience that I'm going to go through. I'm going to go through experiences of feeling abandonment, and I'm going to go through experiences of feeling belonging. Well, then my next category of experiences that I'm going to have, so I'm going to have experiences of feeling abused or misused, right? I view abused as abnormally used. I just take the word abnormal and I take the word used and I just put them together. And the world according to Hugh, abused is someone who's been abnormally used, or I'm abusing someone, I'm abnormally using them. I think a healthier, cleaner way in most cases, not in all cases, would just be I've been misused or I've been misusing someone. Well, what's the opposite of abuse? It'd be nurture. And so I'm going to have experiences of being nurtured, or in other words, being cared for. My next category of experiences that I'm going to have is feeling rejected, right? And if I felt rejected, well, the opposite of feeling rejected is to be accepted. So I'm going to have experiences of being accepted. And then I'm going to have experiences of being betrayed or feeling betrayed, right? And then what did I make it mean when I was betrayed? And then I'm going to have experiences of loyalty, because that's the opposite of betrayal. And so what did I make it mean about the experiences of loyalty? So I've got abandonment, abuse, betrayal, and acceptance. I've got belonging, nurturing or being cared for, loyalty, and acceptance. And so I've got these like two categories of experiences, and some, of course, like belonging and acceptance feel really, really good, and abandonment and rejection feel like not so good. And so those are my experiences. As I go through those experiences, when I can learn to be taught by them through the message of the emotions, then I will learn about myself and I'll learn my wholeness. So why did the indigenous people do sweat lodges, and why did they do fire dances and sun dances and right, like, and all the other ceremonies that have gone on? Why did the ancient Egyptians have temple endowment ceremonies, right? Like, what are we trying to do when we're trying to do this? We're trying to set ourselves into a ceremonial setting. Why do I want a ceremonial setting? Because I live in a community. What happens in a community? I'm misunderstood. I'm not emotionally seen. I'm not heard. And so what do these ceremonies do? They put me in a ritualistic mindset where I can like get my intention right. I can get my mindset right. And then I can go in and I can have these emotional experiences that shift the perspective that I am seen and I am heard. And you just can't really understand that from an intellectual perspective. You have to understand it from an experiential perspective. And that's why these retreats are doing so well, is because people are coming out. And if you look at, why do we do cold plunge? Why do we do sweat lodges? Why do we do the Mustang Medicine, the holotropic breathwork ceremony? Why are these things becoming really, really popular? And it's shown in all the healing data and the reports that are coming out there, is because I'm getting emotional experiences through all of this that are showing me my wholeness, and I'm learning it myself. That doesn't feel like a complete way to answer that. In fact, I'm not even like semi-satisfied with that answer, but I hope that it's somewhat makes sense. But if you just actually start participating in some of these ceremonies and start participating it's like what happens in yoga. Yoga is actually just a ceremony with my body, right? That's all that's actually happening. I go in, I set an intention, I get into prayer form, I fold my arms. Yoga meaning union, right? Between my left and my right, between my masculine and my feminine. Well, it's like what's happening? I'm bringing all my parts together into one great whole. That's yoga, right? If you get into the Sanskrit. And so, yeah.
And it's practice of awareness too. So
yeah, because you have to have awareness.
Yeah, it's the experiential.
And then it's like, well, what am I becoming aware of? I'm becoming aware of the things that I feel fragmented within myself. That's my biggest awareness. Because what was the first thing that Adam was told, right? Going back to the ancient stories. I like these ancient stories. I'm not a big fan of Orthodox religion, but I like the ancient stories. I think the organized religions, because if I'm going to speak about their stories, I should probably give context to my perspective and my position on it. I think organized religions are the keepers of the stories. I think I think it gets a little wonky when they propose to be interpreters of the story, and so that's my simple position on it. So I like the fact that we have these stories, and then I like doing the homework and trying to dig in and understand the interpretation of the story. But the interpretation of the story of Adam, what is it? It's the masculine energy meeting Eve, the feminine energy. And they're at odds with each other, and they're trying to come together. And how do they get at odds with each other? By blaming and shaming what they are, right? And so that fragments them, and then that separates them, and then it's the wrestle to come back together into their union. Well, in this whole process, what's the first thing that Adam is told, right? He's told by the gods, like, wake up, Adam, and then go do something about it. He's told, wake up. Awake and arise is like how the ancient story is simplified. And so what am I awakening to? Well, it's like I got to awaken to my emotional traumas and my emotional wounds, because those are the things that fragment me from my whole self. And I think what happens with Eve is that Eve says, hey, I have eaten the fruit and I've become aware of all of my parts, right? And I've become aware of my judgments, and I'm learning how to not judge all of these parts. I'm learning how to not label them, and I'm learning how to accept them. I'm learning how all of these parts of me belong, and I'm learning how all these parts need to be cared for, and I'm learning how all these parts, I need to be loyal to myself, with all of these parts, and accept all of these parts. So now I'm bringing it back to the self, and I'm coming back to the whole self after I've been abandoning myself and judging myself and rejecting myself, right? And all these things. And so it's being brought back. And then Eve says, after she's kind of like wrestling with this, the world according to Hugh, she's wrestling with this. She says, hey, if you don't wake up, then I'm going to leave, and then you're going to be alone, Adam. And it's like, okay, well, guess who else is going to be alone? Eve's going to be alone, right? But what she's actually saying is, once I awaken to my wholeness, I would rather be awake and alone than to be with a partner who's still asleep. I think that's what's really being said in between. And so it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to awaken, well, what do I got to awaken to? Well, I got to awaken to the parts that I'm judging. I got to awaken to the parts that I'm abandoning, that I'm betraying, that I'm misusing, that I'm rejecting. I got to awaken to those parts within me that I'm not accepting. When I can start to do that, boy, you become a really different kind of partner. You don't become a victim. You start saying, hey, I just was judging this and I'm just in judgment of it. And I'm trying to find some empathy and I'm trying to find some appreciation for myself in this whole process. And then you got a partner who's trying to do the same thing for themselves, and you can really get unified, you know.
Yeah, that whole sovereignty piece, because
well, you know, you
yes
look
to
at
everything you
sovereignty
said.
and it's like, what's the opposite of, again, this is my theme, right? It's like, let's look at the opposite. So what's the opposite of sovereignty? It's codependency, right? What are we all trying to heal from? Is all these codependent relationships. What's another word for codependent relationship? A trauma bond, right? But what's really a trauma bond? It's that we bonded in our fragmented sense of self. So I didn't think I was good enough. And so, but you thought I was really good, right? And I give you a perfect example of this. This happens all the time in my coaching sessions. It's like one of the partners wants to leave. And I actually did leave a partner, you know, over this. And I wish I would have known what I know now. We would have had different discussions. I don't know if things would have worked out any different, but the process could have definitely been a lot more gentler, and maybe things could have worked out. But it's like, it's really painful when you have someone that you're at odds with, but you absolutely love, and so our traumas. What bonds us together, you can't avoid a trauma bond. There's nothing wrong with a trauma bond. Because we all are fragmented, so we're all going to bond, but we have to understand our traumas. My trauma is a match to your trauma, even though my trauma is different from your trauma, right? And so a great example of this would be, let's say you got a gal that she's raised and she doesn't know her wholeness, and she's kind of babied and placated and coddled by her father, and he makes life really, really easy, and he's kind of ripping her off actually, because there's no contrast to her life. So anytime contrast shows up, now contrast means like difficulties start to show up. And she starts to see parts of her flaws and her deficiencies, and she doesn't want to look at it because, well, she had a dad who like just really cared for her, and dad never allowed her to look at her deficiencies, so she thinks she's like this beautiful, perfect little princess, and but deep down inside she's got these stories about herself, and she's fragmented. And so what kind of guy is she going to marry? Well, she's going to marry a guy who coddles her, and she's going to marry a guy who treats her just like her dad treats her. Well, it's like this husband that she marries, why is he treating her that way? Because he's ripping her off too, right? It's like, well, because his traumas are that if he works really hard and if he does all the right things, and it's this checklist, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to bring home the bacon, and I'm going to put money in the account, and I'm going to buy you flowers on Valentine's Day, and I'm just going to do the things. And so it's all the doings. And then she never has to look at any difficulties. And all of a sudden life starts showing her some difficulties. And now he's like, well, I'll do more. Right. And so it's just really simple. It's like these two traumas just matched each other really, really well, because neither of them know their wholeness. Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I followed that story all the way through.
I don't even know if it's making sense.
It's
very common.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. There were two important things I sort of wanted to speak to, which was one, language that I have found helpful for myself when you spoke about the opposite of sovereignty was outsourcing, because it applies to the sovereignty in partnerships and relationships as well, which is if there's some part of yourself that you're not governing within yourself, you've now outsourced it, right? Like I'm outsourcing all of my tech to this person. I'm outsourcing, you know, my call center to another country because it's cheaper. It's so much easier for that girl in your example to outsource her worth and her beauty to a man because that's comfortable. And where we're comfortable, right? An object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. So we're bound kind of like by Newtonian physics, right, on this earth. And so I feel like it's also such an energetic shift.
And what I would say is, not to interrupt you, but I think it's really important to add to what you're saying. I think Newtonian physics has a very strong influence on us. And if anyone's looking for a really good book, I would go read The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. They disrupted, he's a cellular biologist who disrupted Newtonian physics. But the point being is, the way I would say that is that our nervous system functions off of what is familiar, not what is actually safe and true and whole. My nervous system wants to know what's familiar, and whatever is familiar to me, it doesn't have to actually be safe. It doesn't actually have to teach me my wholeness. It just has to be consistently showing up in my life, and then I'll know how to dance within that, and then I'll choose that. And so to your point, right, is that we're bound by Newtonian physics. You know, what we're really bound by is the familiarity of our nervous system and how our nervous system interprets what feels safe versus what's actually safe. And that's what we're trying to learn. And anyways, I interrupted you, but.
Oh, that was perfect. That really, I'm glad that you expanded on that, because the outsourcing, what it does is it leaves like a little signal out there waiting for someone else to fill it. And so when you say trauma bond, those work really well with people who, whatever they're reaching out for to outsource, right? That's what the other person is willing to give, right? As part of their outsourcing, and vice versa. And that's when you get that strong trauma bond, right? That you teach about. And that's where they really hang on, and they apparently work well together at first. And so this is the other thing I wanted to say, because I'm glad you reiterated it's not bad to have a trauma bond. It's almost necessary, like you said, keep your arms and legs in the vehicle at all times, buckle up. Like this is how it works. Like I can raise my kids as perfectly and beautifully and with all these Brené Brown teachings that I want, and my kids still have a therapy fund, because I'm sure there's going to be things that have affected them in a certain way, which have an equal and opposite reaction, and those are going to be the things for them, right? And they're going to have the things that they've outsourced as they're learning their sovereignty, and those are going to connect with the other people's in an equal and opposite manner. And so it's kind of like the natural way of things, and I would, like you said, hold off on completely judging that. Yes, there's probably good, better, best ways to bond with people, but because it's part of the journey to wholeness, I want to read you my literature on sovereignty so that people can understand this a little better, because this is what really helped me. So if you can understand this is the goal, you can really start understanding how the trauma bonds are no longer serving you. And then I want to make a beautiful point about the evolution through that can absolutely, it can end a relationship, yes, if that's the right thing, like you said. It could change the conversation through that decision, and it could absolutely evolve into something where one's catalyzing the other. And so when you start changing what you're outsourcing, right, or healing these trauma bonds or reclamation of some sovereignty, that is going to apply a pressure to the other thing that's bonded to it, naturally, right? What are they going to do with that? And so all of that process, I think, is natural for the evolution. I think it serves our evolution. But the origins of sovereignty actually came from the French, and then John Locke used it in the Declaration of Independence, or, the ideas behind it. But the noun of sovereign is a supreme ruler, and it's one, It's all encompassing. It's a supreme ruler. It was originally a political term for the authority of the state to govern itself. And as an adjective, sovereign means possessing supreme ultimate power. I wrote it down. That's why I'm looking off camera. I will send you a picture of my little journal. And also as an adjective, it means possessing royal power and status. It means it's done and independent without, or basically done in independency, in an independent state without outside interference. And the last adjective definition I loved and had to keep in here was sovereign is a good and effective remedy. It is, so it's good. So you're good. The sovereign body that governs is good. It's effective. So to go from trauma bonds, misunderstanding, no emotional intelligence, and make the leap to be able to be in a position of sovereignty as with yourself as the supreme ruler, all ultimate royal power, where you can do things independently without outside interference, and the outcome will be good and effective, like good and effective remedies, good decisions, like I'm making metaphors, right? Like you say, according to Hugh, according to Crystal, but good and effective remedies for my life, good choices for my soul, right? Like good food for my health, which is not going to be the same as everybody else. And the ideas around a sovereign body, about being able to govern themselves in the 1800s, was also had some political ideas about it not being appointed, but it basically being agreed to by all of the dependents in the country. So all the effectors agreed, and that is basically how it came to pass or worked, was that they gave all the power to the sovereign body. And you know, just the metaphors with the emotions and the cells in your body and the atoms, right? It's that sum of all your parts idea again. If anyone is alienated or rebelling, right? And that's actually where the French came up with the term to dispel some of the rebellion, right? And give all power to one sovereign body. But the evolved idea, right, in the Declaration of Independence, is that it's a willful surrender of all the parts of yourself to serve the whole, and then it's ultimate power. And so I do think that you can't go from over here to a sovereign governing body itself with good and effective remedies without all that work in between, right? Because all of those pieces are the reclamation of your sovereignty and the learning about your sovereignty, and ultimately to govern yourself independently without outside sources, I think is such a beautiful concept. And when I'm stepping into that, it is so peaceful. It is so grounded. It's moving from the inside out. When there's places I find I've lost my sovereignty, right, or I'm participating in things, it is the quickest remedy, the quickest understanding. And then it doesn't usually perpetrate, like you said, the conversation might have been different with your partner. We don't know, but what the symptoms of that are is love, respect, understanding, witnessing, because you're sovereign. So there's nothing outside of you that's really threatening you. You know you can govern all of that. So someone else's behavior, or on your way to that as it's pressuring maybe your partner, the answer is never in this fight, in this go back and forth, right? The answer is never, and there's some depth to what I'm saying that Hugh knows a lot of my personal situations, so he might be able to describe it better or color it if I'm leaving out some details. But the answer is never in, you know, the details of that and the push and pull and the trauma bond and the outsourcing. The answer is always to come back over to what practices help me understand and perpetuate my sovereignty better. Because at that point, you'll no longer begin to outsource, right? You'll no longer outsource your self-esteem. You'll no longer start to make stories about the reactionary behavior or the things that are happening, right? Or someone's tying the horse to the hitching post again, but all of a sudden everything's quiet over here because it's not about me anymore when I'm sovereign.
Like what you have, I think,
right?
Here's how I define sovereignty. um, and I'll use the metaphor of a Mustang, of a wild horse. By nature, they're herd animals, just like by nature humans are family, right, driven. But it's really easy to be codependent and to be trauma bonded. In fact, I think it's impossible to not be. However, what we need to do is heal the trauma bond, because remember, it's the judgments I had about myself that fractured or fragmented my belief about me, and where those holes and those cracks left my belief about me, you came in and made me whole. You filled it in, right? This is the trauma bond. And then all of a sudden it turns out, oh, that's not true. I make myself whole, and therefore I've got to pull you out of those areas that I thought made me whole, and realize that I am whole and complete as I am. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't need you in my life. Sovereignty to me is it's the ability to walk alone together, right? It's because it's synergy. Two are always going to be more powerful and more miraculous than one. And so sovereignty, and this again, this is the world according to Hugh, because my definition is a little bit different than John Locke. I would like to pretend that the French came up with the word, the founding fathers and the Constitution evolved the concept and the idea, and then Hugh and the Mustangs evolved it even just a little bit step further, maybe a little bit too aggrandizement, but I think the point being is that sovereignty is the ability to walk alone. There's the independence. There's my wholeness, and then together. Because, and maybe we could even expand that a little bit better and define it a little bit better. What I have is what I need is to understand my sovereign wholeness, like taking those two terms and making it into one idea or one concept, is my sovereign wholeness. So I'm independent. I am the ultimate supreme power. I've been totally tested and tried, and then have all of my understanding through my experiences, and I end up with just appreciation and empathy and discernment rather than judgment. And so I go through that process. Now I also understand my wholeness, and so I find my sovereign wholeness. Now when I understand my sovereign wholeness, this sets me up to now attracting and aligning a sovereign partnership, because somebody who has their sovereign wholeness is only going to be attracted and aligned with somebody else who has their sovereign wholeness. So maybe we could say the opposite of a trauma bond is a sovereign partnership, right?
Say that it is it's because you're participating consciously with choice. Right. It's not because you're unconsciously bonded, right?
Yeah.
So you can still choose to co-create while you're walking together. It means that you're still participating.
Yeah,
but it's a choice, right? Out of your sovereignty.
Trauma bond is chasing each other. Here, I need you to make me enough, and you need me to make you enough, right? But what is a sovereign partnership? I choose you. This is the story of Adam and Eve, right? In the beginning, there's a little bit of chasing and kind of push and pull dynamics. And it's like, hey, you better wake up. And if you don't wake up, then I'm going to leave you. And that's kind of like a shitty way to approach it, but it's a really painful way from Eve's perspective. It's like, I've been Eve in that perspective before. And I did walk out of the garden. And I, again, I might have not done that with the most temperance, and I could have probably had more character excellence and virtues in that. But the point is I understand the pain of that, of not feeling seen, not feeling heard, emotionally, right? Not feeling like I emotionally belonged and I emotionally was accepted given all the pain and the difficulties that relationship had experienced. And so it's like, yeah, I need to be seen, I need to be heard, and I need to feel like I belong and that I'm fully accepted. But that's not going to happen until I'm doing that to my, with myself. Otherwise, I'm just still reaching out and trying to create a trauma bond in the name of all these like fancy healing words, and it's just a crock of shit. And so the point being is that I've got to have my sovereign wholeness before I'll ever attract a sovereign partnership. And it turns out like there's four main charts that I've designed to explain the process of how this happens. And we basically talked about all of them. We just haven't gone into all the full details. So anyone that's listening and wants those, I'll just DM me and I'll just text them over to you. But this the ability to walk alone is my sovereign wholeness. Together, to do that, to choose into that with somebody else who's doing it by themselves and then choosing to do it with me. Now we're in choice rather than in chase, right? Like we're not.
And I wonder too, since you clarified on the Newtonian physics, I feel like it goes hand in hand. It's the same principle as the quantum mechanics, right? That we're talking about. It's because you've sat in sovereignty and felt whole and felt supported and loved and witnessed yourself. That gravity, the gravity or the density or the vibration of that attracts more of that, right? And so that is also, it's a universal principle. It must be done, and it's also
so I would say
the only way it's ever done.
You
right?
called it outreaching. Before I sat in sovereignty, I sat in codependency. And I got out of codependency because I embraced the fact that I was codependent, right? I wasn't trying to reject that I was codependent. I accepted that I was codependent. I don't think we ever heal our traumas by rejecting and abandoning our traumas. I think and again, this is just me, is that I allowed my traumas to belong. And then I began to care for them. And then I began to be loyal to the needs that I had that were driving my beliefs of where I was fragmented, right? And where I was traumatized. I really had to start caring for those things. And then when I could care for them, I could see the beauty of them. And when I could see the beauty of them, then I could fully appreciate them and accept them. And so I was able to care for myself by fully allowing my traumas and allowing all my fuckery and all of my bullshit, right? They say the healing process begins when you get tired of your own bullshit. Well, it's like, yeah, but what you have to understand about your bullshit is that it needs to be seen, it needs to be empathetically witnessed, because it didn't just magically show up one day. All your bullshit showed up because you had these beliefs about yourself that weren't in alignment with your wholeness. And I've had tons of those, and I've attracted a lot of experiences that have really highlighted all my bullshit. And it's like, well, what I really needed to do is just to understand, like, yeah, this is true, right? And accept this, and then nurture those wounds. And that's the healing process. And so that it all needs to be embraced. It all needs to be nurtured and cared for. And that's what I think the ceremonies are for. That's what I think the endowments are for. That's what I think all of the attunements that we go through in the different, healing modalities and everything. What's happening is I'm just learning how to belong and let all my parts belong. My shitty parts as well as my shiny parts, right? I'm just like letting it all belong.
I love that. I think one of the reasons also why I sat in my bullshit too for so long is just because there's not a lot of spaces out there. And this is what I love about people talking about creating safe spaces and circles and rewilding retreats and things like this is because it's so scary, right? It's so scary even when you come to press upon the idea that that's what needs to be done. Oh my gosh, then where do you go? What do you do? I mean, you're just going to sustain more trauma if you're going to the wrong places and you're not being witnessed empathetically, right? You're sustaining more. And that, I think, is what has been so detrimental in the past. And I think that's what is so hopeful now, that there are literally places you can read online and where they're saying, we will do this for you. Come. So you know some therapy is going to happen there, and you know some witnessing is going to happen there because they're telling you right up front. And I think that's the beautiful thing too. And then it just perpetuates more people out in the world who may just run into at Starbucks or at Walmart, who, you know what I mean, who will respond empathetically and allow all of that to be seen and heard and allow all your parts to come home. And so I think that's another really important thing that you harped on, was like, where do I go to get this? And, you know, you were really lucky too, because you had the horses, right? And you had something, you know, you had found, and hopefully we're all this lucky. I also had some really amazing shaman and supporters and friends, you know, who are willing to do that. But the first time you step into that, it's almost paralyzing, right? It's almost the last thing you could do is that's going to lead to wholeness. So glad you talked about that on the retreats, and that's what you get, and that's what you get in these environments, to, just like you said, start learning in an experiential way that I can reclaim all these parts of me and make them whole. You do that beautifully for people. You've done that for me, and I really appreciate that. So I think that's one of your superpowers. Yeah, I definitely think that's something in plant and animal medicine too. Horses have done that for me as well.
Yeah.
Horse stories today. I know, listen, you'll think this is so great. I had thought that horses growing up were just these ultimate magical unicorn healers. No matter what I did, a horse would fix everything. And that's kind of how I participated with them for the first 10 or 15 years of me mucking stalls and learning how to ride and train horses, until I was about, I think I was 17 or 18 one day, and had gone to the stalls to this horse I was leasing, and in a horrible mood, you know, something horrible had happened, as these things do to 17-year-olds, which end the world. And I had approached my horse with that energy and with that mentality and emotion. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I got bucked off. I almost got kicked. The horse ended up cutting my leg on a jump that day. And I, for the first time, started realizing that maybe the outside world was a mirror to my internal world. And that was like my first clue with that horse. Right? So I think that is the step, you know, that's the realization, that's the responsibility, that's out of the victimhood mentality, you know, into the co-creator. And that was part of the step of me also owning my own shit. Like, I walked into that stable, you know, and that wasn't fair to the horse. like that was me. Like, that was, you know, and it's just been a perpetual repetitive process of those learning experiences for, you know, the next 30 years.
No, what you said is perfect. You said that your external world was mirroring to you what was going on in the internal world. And for thousands of years, they've been saying that the horse is the mirror to the soul. And you know, I didn't understand that for a long time. But I understand it now. But what I also understand is that all of my relationships are a mirror to the soul. The tree is a mirror to the soul, right? Like, everything is a mirror to the soul, meaning everything is there to teach me about me. The way this world has been designed is that I'm able to. I just think it's so brilliant. There's nothing that's happening outside of me that's not trying to reflect what's going on inside of me. And I don't think we could have created such a beautiful holographic universe or right to be able to just mirror everything back to me. It's like if I'm the co-creator of my entire experience, well then what's the thing that I want to learn in my co-creation? Is I want to learn all about me with my emotions. I've never had an experience that didn't get valued by my emotion in the experience, meaning all emotion gives value to every experience. So if I like, what would a first kiss feel like if I didn't have any emotions, right? And what would a breakup feel like, or a divorce feel like, if I didn't have emotions? And what would a roller coaster feel like if I didn't have emotion? And what would it feel like to hold my child for the first time, right? If I didn't have emotions? It's like all of your emotions are your messengers coming from the kingdom of God. This is my, this is my opinion, because Jesus said the kingdom of God is inside of you. And it's like, well, where does God live? He lives in, not he, but God lives in the kingdom of God. And so where's the kingdom of God? Well, it's inside of you. Okay, so what are the messengers from the kingdom that are coming to teach you the message of God, right? I think those messengers are your emotions. So every experience has value because of your emotions. And for me, I was taught to not understand my emotions, to suppress most of my emotions, particularly the ones that are a little bit more related to the shadow side, like fear and anger and sadness and depression and disappointment. And right, it's like these really frustration, these really difficult emotions, I learned to just avoid and ignore them. And that just created more pain, because my emotions are these messengers trying to teach me about my circumstance and about this external world that is mirroring to me about me, so that I could learn something. And I can't be taught by it because I'm being tortured by it, because I won't even listen to the messenger that's coming. And it's like, I think our emotions are the messengers from the kingdom that are coming to teach us about us. And we've got to learn about our emotions. What's the number one thing that we all want in our relationships? It's like, I want emotional connection. I want to be emotionally seen. I want to be emotionally heard. I want to be emotionally known at my depth. Why? Because all of my experience are based in emotions. I don't have an experience that doesn't have an emotion tied to it. So how can I be understood, and how can I be seen, and how can I be known? How could my heart be softened from all the hard things that I'm experiencing if I'm not emotionally connected to you? It's like, well, how do I become emotionally connected? It's like, I got to have emotional intelligence. I have to have intelligence and understanding about my emotions. And shit, I spent 40 years of my life not understanding at least half of my emotions. So what kind of relationships do you think I had? I'd say like pretty shitty ones. Yeah, like that's it.
Yeah. No, no, it is true, but man, I can feel the frustration in my body, because what a tragic story, not only for you, but for the collective. And it's just such a tragic story, is to take the one piece, right? Take the messengers. And I love your analogies. I love that brilliant interpretation. And you already know that, but to take the piece, right? To take the piece that's the answer, and tell the story about that incorrectly, right? To misuse that, right? To present and vilify the one thing is completely tragic, because like what you said, our memories are stored. The higher the emotion of our experience neurologically in our nervous system, what's happening in our brain, the more emotion tied to that experience, the more likely it will be filed away and remembered, and the neurological connections will pervade and stay, and we'll have those memories. And who do we think we are? We're our memories. We're our experiences. It's our entire personality. So to try to void or repress our experiences of emotion, we're like walking around, like you said again, as fractured people, as half of people, or not allowed to fully remember, or not allowing the full range of emotions is not allowing your full humanness, and not allowing your experience this go round, or this only go round, whatever you believe. It's just life, really. And so what a tragic message. And yeah, I always appreciate your vulnerability and your relatability and your sharing. And I always have a soft spot in my heart for men, because in my own little myopic crystal experience, that has been perpetrated further on the men in my life and what I've witnessed. But still, I had a similar story because, of my situation, and the freeing of those emotions is, and the emotion intelligence. I just want to mention it's also can be messy, and that's okay. And we also need to show ourselves a lot of grace, especially if some of these listeners are first stepping into these things or first considering these things, like the story I shared with you right before we hopped on tonight. There are some things, and there is grace available for that as well. And we're rewriting the story. And how hopeful, right, that you've come to this place, and then you've got a roadmap to help people get there too. I appreciate you. I think it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that we tell the story forward, right? So that we're not continuing that repression and that message. And we're just, I don't know, I just think we're more fully alive. I just think after doing a couple years of this work too, I'm just so less inflammatory, right? More accepting, less reactive. And I just think we need all the people who want to be part of that. I know you talk a lot about community, and I love that aspect. Some of the prophecies and some of the things that are kind of in communities, I think. And
well,
so
it's like
I don't know. I just love that. I
didn't get my emotional wounds and my emotional traumas by being alone. I got them in my communal settings. And so if I got them in my communal settings, well, then it stands to reason that the only way that I'll actually find healing from communal traumas and communal wounds is in communities that understand their wholeness and have their sovereign wholeness. And so you don't get wounded alone, and you don't heal alone, right? And so I think it's just so critical. But the fact is that we have to understand our wholeness, and I think we understand our wholeness when we can embrace our traumas.
I love that. Do you have any last horse metaphors?
The one thing I will say that comes to my mind is that going back to the nervous system behaves with what is familiar, not with what is actually safe. And here's what I mean by that, is that you're never going to outthink your body's nervous system. Your body's nervous system is going to drive your behavior more than your positive mental thoughts will drive your behavior. Your behavior comes predominantly from your nervous system, not from your positive mental attitude. If positive mental attitude worked, it would have already worked by now. And we'd all just be standing in front of the mirror, and we'd say wonderful things, and then we'd all be like Tony Robbins running around, and like Jesus walking on water. And so it's like, well, why is my positive attitude not working? Because the thing that actually works is the thing that you believe the most in your nervous system, and that's where all the behaviors are coming from, right? This is your trauma. It's either your trauma or your wholeness. And so let me give you a good example of what that means. When a wild horse comes into domestic wild horse, or somebody's adopted one and sent it over to me to help it out, right? We put it in the barn, and the wild horse, now a normal wild horse has, like a horse out in the wild has to walk about 15 to 16 miles a day to get the proper nutrition, the proper water, and there's whole reasons behind that. You bring him into a barn. Everything in the wild was out to hurt him, harm him, or kill him. Everything in the barn is out to nurture him, to love him, to care for him, to snuggle him, right? And there's two completely different worlds. And you can't get within 10 feet of that horse. He's petrified, he's terrified, because he doesn't think that you're there to snuggle him and love him and cuddle him. He thinks you're there to hurt him and to harm him. That's his nervous system. And now you're going to feed him the very best food that money can buy. So he gets the best alfalfa, and he doesn't have to walk 15 to 16 miles to get that. He has to walk 15 to 16 feet, right, to get that. It's like 2 strides of his entire body length, and he gets all the nutrition that he wants for the day. And the water is pumping out of the purified spring that's coming from the mountain. And you leave that barn door open, and that dude will take off and go right back to the wild in a snap of a finger. And you say, well, gosh, I'm here to love you. I'm here to cuddle you. I'm here to protect you. I'm here to provide for you. I'm giving you the best nutrition. I'm giving you the most purified, amazing water. And you have shelter and you have safety that's here. And that dude will go back to what is familiar in the blink of an eye. And that's because the nervous system does not do what is safe. It does what is familiar. And so if you were raised in a really like screwed up environment and no one taught you who you really are, and there's sarcasm and there's all going on, and that's what's familiar to you, that's what you're going to choose. That's what you're going to create. That's what you're going to call into your life is because that's what's familiar and that's what's known. And I see that with the horses until they have experiences that directly contradict those old familiar beliefs that are actually not serving them. When they have experiences, immersive experiences that directly contradict that fight, flight, survival nervous system, then they begin to change the nervous system, and then they begin to understand what is actually truly safe. So my personal wild horse, we have 178 acres out here, and you leave the gate open and the dude just walks like 10 feet around, and he just walks up and down the road, and he goes and he visits the other animals that are the donkeys and and all the chickens and the rabbits, and he goes and visits them, and then he goes back to his little barn, and he sits there and he waits, and he's like, yeah, this is where my food is at, and this is where my safety is. And so we've rewritten his nervous system, and then we get new behaviors that actually serve him. And so it's the nervous system that has to be redone, not your thinking, right? Meaning not your positive mental attitude kind of stuff. That's why it doesn't work. Yeah.
I've been that horse.
Yeah.
I know. We all probably have some aspects. So thank you. Thank you for that teaching.
Thank you for having me tonight.
So much. No, this is great. It's so fun to be able to see you because you're so far. You have a rewiring coming at the end of 2, which I don't know, is that one already
full? It's not full yet. Well, it was sold out, and then we expanded it and we opened up a few more spots. And so normally we limit it to like 10 to 12 people. We're actually opening it up to, we have 30 cabins here, so we're gonna let as many people come as they want.
Oh wow, cool. Okay, that's cool. So if you're not following Hugh, follow him. Check that out. It's Mustang Medicine Experiences.com, right? If you want to with us in September, you'll get to see what Hugh does and all of that, and just all those practices you mentioned. So you can check that out on my stuff too.
Yeah.
But, man, I really appreciate it. What a fun Sunday night. I hope everyone got something out of it. Reach out questions and other things, and man, it's good to see you. I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Okay, we'll chat soon.
Hey.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Have a good night.